So the president wasn't mincing his words last night. Ramaphosa says many South Africans are just ignoring lockdown rules. Of course, our behaviour is absolutely crucial. But there are several pieces to the COVID puzzle. Michael Marillier tracking that story for us. So, Michael, you've looked at risk factors in COVID hotspots. What are they saying?
Yeah, so Sally, this vulnerability index has been released by Statistics South Africa, and they basically look at the overall risk factors in a particular municipality or district municipality, and then they look at how it all adds up in terms of the vulnerability of a particular community. So we're going to look at a few different risk factors in some of the hotspots, as you mentioned, Sally, and what you'll see with a lot of them are these are things that you can't change overnight. These are structural problems in South Africa, and that government will have to address over the medium to long term. And that's perhaps why we're seeing some of the problems in these hotspots. Let's focus on Nelson Mandela Bay. First of all, Sally, 11% is attributed to no vehicle while being employed. So in other words, people who have to get to work, but they don't have a private car, and so they have to use public transport. So 11% of the risk is attributed to that factor. Then, Sally, some other pieces of the puzzle. 8% linked to a lack of sanitation, access to proper sanitation and water. 5% linked to the water infrastructure. Not so much in terms of crowding, but this is where it gets really interesting, Sally. Most of the risk is attached to age, so that's elderly populations, often above the age of 60, multi-generation households, so for instance, young children living with their grandparents, and then, Sally, chronic medication. So this is often a sign that people have those comorbidities like hypertension or diabetes. So 25% of the risk score is attached to that particular indicator. So demographics playing a very big role in Nelson Mandela Bay. Let's focus on another hotspot which was identified. Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, mentioning the garden route last night. This is interesting because the transport issue is a little bit higher here. We know there is a lot of traffic between the garden route and the Eastern Cape. Also, the scores in terms of sanitation and water, not that high in the bigger picture. Once again, Sally, it's those factors that are linked to age demographics. So those multi-generation households where you tend to see the children living with the grandparents, for instance, the age factor, a 24% contribution there, and again, the chronic medication factor, 28%. So those are really the key drivers in terms of risk in those two municipalities, Sally.
And now, if we look at the Sarah Baartman district, it's quite a wide-ranging district. It's south of PE, but it also goes inland to areas such as Makhanda, Grahamstown, Aberdeen, Jeffreys Bay on the coast. So that's very rural in places. How does that change the picture?
So really interesting, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking a lot about the urban areas and how compact these particular areas are. This is not really an urban part of the country whatsoever, but we are seeing problems here. Let's focus on that. Stats SA is suggesting perhaps that the water and sanitation infrastructure is causing some of the trouble in the Sarah Baartman municipality. Certainly it's a lot higher than the other two hotspots that we've seen. Take a look at that, Sally. In terms of sanitation, a 16% contribution to the overall risk. Water, we're looking at 5%. Again, perhaps not surprisingly, crowds, not really an issue in this part of the country. When it comes to those multi-generational households, around about 15%, actually lower than the other two hotspots. So it seems, Sally, that water and sanitation infrastructure a big concern in Sarah Baartman. And interestingly enough, we did see government deploy water tankers, water tanks across the country. In fact, in the first 4 months of lockdown, more than 400,000 households got support from government. But, you know, that is 4 months. The question is, how long can they maintain that? It's a sign, perhaps, of the underlying problems in South Africa that are now coming to the fore during the pandemic. And as Stats SA has said, Sally, government's going to have to pay attention to this, because we do have these micro hotspots, and they're becoming hotspots for different reasons. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So piecing the puzzle together isn't always as simple as it sounds.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael Marillier.